So far in this course, the only type of procedure that we've written is referred to as a subroutine. As you hopefully know by now at this point, a subroutine is a procedure which carries out a sequence of instructions, and once it's finished it simply ends. It can also be called by other subroutines to break a long complex procedure into multiple separate parts. A function is also a procedure which can carry out a sequence of instruction and then simply end, with the added advantage that a function can also return a value to whichever procedure called it. And this part of the lesson is going to start explaining how basic functions work. Let's start by opening up the file that I've downloaded and extracted, and then we can click the Enable Content button if we need to. And once again, we're back to this simple little game that generates random scores for two different players and then indicates who's the winner by showing different messages and using different colours. Let's open the Visual Basic Editor then and have a look at the code we've used to create this system. It should be fairly familiar to you by now. You'll have seen this in various other parts of various modules of this course. We've already made one small attempt to start separating the main roll again procedure into different procedures. We have a procedure called reset game, which accepts a couple of values, the reference to the player 1 cell and the player 2 cell, and then simply uses those values to reset the scores and change the formatting and clear the contents of the description cell. What we'd like to do next is continue this theme by creating a new procedure which generates the new random score for each player. So what we'd like to do is replace this little section of code in these two lines, which returns a new random number. Now, in order to make this work, we can't just simply use a subroutine, because a subroutine isn't capable of returning a value in VBA. What we need to do instead is create a function so that we can use the result of the function to set the value of the appropriate cells. Let's declare that new function then in the same module as our existing code. If we scroll down to the bottom, we can begin declaring a new function in much the same way we declare a subroutine, except that instead of using the word sub, we use the word function instead. We can then enter a new name for the function, which I'd like to call new score. And then if we hit enter, we'll see that we get some example code written out for us automatically. So just as we see end sub when we create a new sub, we receive end function when we create a new function. One thing we can do with a function that we can't do with a subroutine is indicate what type the function returns. So after the name of the function and after the parentheses, we can say, in much the same way you would declare the type of a variable, we can say as, and then either the data type or the class of object that the function returns a reference to. In this example, our function is going to return a value as a double, so that's exactly what we'll say at the end of the function's definition, function new score as double. Now we can add the code which determines which value the function actually returns. In some examples, this may require many lines of code and a complex sequence of calculations before determining the final result. Our example's a lot simpler than that. We just need a single instruction to return a value in this example. Whenever you want your function to return a value, you need to start the instruction by referring to the function's name, so I can say new score, and then I can assign a value to the function's result by making it equal to some kind of expression. In this case, we're going to use a call to the worksheet function called randBetween and ask for a value between 1 and 10. So there we go, there's our basic function written, returning a value that is a random number between 1 and 10. Before we call our new function in another procedure, it may be worthwhile testing quickly that your function returns a result you expect. One possible way to do this is to use the immediate window. If I head to the view menu at the top of the screen and look for the immediate window, this should appear at the bottom of the screen and allows me to call the results of any functions that I want to check the value of. So I can do this by typing in a question mark, and then if I type in a control space keyboard shortcut so that I can see my IntelliSense, I can then look for my new score function, and if I simply hit enter at the end of that statement, it will return some kind of value. I can test this multiple times just by clicking at the end of that line again and pressing enter, and I'll get a different score, and each time I do that I'll generate a new random number between 1 and 10. So it looks as though things are working as expected so far. Let's close the immediate window and look at how we can then call this function in our main procedure. Calling a function is very much like calling a subroutine. The one big advantage is that we can make use of the result of the function to assign values to other parts of our code. So let's scroll back up to the roll again procedure and find the line which previously called the worksheet function rand between. We can now replace this with a call to our new score procedure. We can do the exact same thing for the next instruction. We can replace worksheet function rand between with a call to new score. So each time we call this function, it will trigger a call to it. It will execute all the code and return a new result to the instruction which called it. So we'll get new values in exactly the same way in player 1 and player 2 cells. Let's just check that this works quickly. If we switch back to the Excel window, we should see no difference as an end user. Our game behaves as normal. We get new random numbers in each of the 2 score cells each time we click the play button. The big advantage as a developer for structuring code like this is we have a lot less work to do should we now decide we want to make changes. Maybe we decide that a range of 1 to 10 isn't a sufficiently large range to play the game effectively. If we switch back to the Visual Basic editor, if we want to adjust that score range, we now have just one single place in which we need to do it. So we could bump the score up to say 20 or 25 say, and we only need to do this in one single place rather than previously the multiple lines of code which called that function. At this point, you can either continue with the extra practice session at the end of this part of the lesson to gain some more experience with writing and calling functions. Alternatively, you can move on to the next part of this lesson, which talks about how to declare parameters in functions.